pioneer, sing for the few.
The game is yours to play now.
The light provides.
This is Eventide Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Eventide Radio. This is a fan-made Destiny podcast where we have roundtable discussions about a variety of different topics concerning the popular video game franchise. At its core, this show is about having in-depth discussions about the game from a variety of different perspectives. I'm your host, Scotty, and with me are my co-hosts, Rob and Mapador, and today we're talking about a couple of different things. We're talking about the crafting shenanigans that have been happening, the DDoS attacks that Bungie's been experiencing, as well as, in good news, Crota's End's grand return in Destiny 2, including the Master Mode that came out this week. So, before we get started, as always, Rob, what have you been up to this week in Destiny?
This week, you'll talk about Master Mode came out, so dabbled a little bit with that. Kind of did the typical 3 runs with the guys, or the boys, I should say. That's what our clan is, or group is called.
The Destiny Boys.
Yeah, the Destiny Boys. What else did I do? Oh, just played with a few different weapons. Tried out the new Checkmate. And this past weekend, I did a bunch of just like Spire, Savathun, like challenges and triumphs, and just kind of finished off. Like, I know it sounds crazy, like it's only week 5 or whatever, but I finished getting all of the red border patterns for all the seasonal weapons because I'm a tryhard.
Oh man,
sweat lord, yeah. No, I haven't gotten all the Crota's end weapons yet, but all the seasonal stuff, like Kept Confidence and Bria's Love and all that. Like I finished those off this week and have been kind of playing around with some of the roles on that, like outside of the crafting shenanigans, like legit crafted weapons. So did that this week.
Matt, what have you been up to this week, Destiny?
Catching up with the story because I missed 2 weeks, so I was doing some more of the seasonal activities. I did more stuff on the weekend, just gone with the crafting shenanigan stuff, but I did some GMs and a Ghost of the Deep run.
No, nice. Did anything good?
No. It's all just the SMG and repeat gauntlets every single time.
Yeah, fair enough. I was also getting caught up in this story. I think I'm... Oh, wait. I don't know if I did this week's... I think I'm mostly caught up. I'm either fully caught up or I'm like a week behind, but I got the pattern completed for the fusion rifle. I think it might have been last week, but I got the pattern completed for the Crota's End machine gun, which is pretty fun. Yeah, I was pretty happy with that. Yeah, that's about it. I was just getting caught up, screwing around, playing Crota's End with you guys, and playing the seasonal stuff on my own, kind of. But yeah, so anyways... Before we talk about Crota's End, will kind of be the meat of our conversation, probably. But before we get into that, we should probably address the 2 large elephants in the room, that being the whole crafting situation that happened and the DDoS attacks that Bungie's been experiencing. So, first up, the crafting thing. So
fun gun.
Yeah. Another one of those kind of situations, like the Prometheus lens thing, where something's super busted and it causes a bunch of silliness, and Bungie decides not to fix it right away, and we kind of get a few days to play around with it, and it's kind of a you had to be there sort of situation. So I believe this whole thing happened with the auto rifle Amit something. I forget what the suffix was on that. But Rob, did you get a chance to play around with that at all?
Yeah, so if you've been living under a rock and had no idea that this was going on last weekend, mainly it was over the weekend, and by Tuesday, Wednesday, they had kind of snuffed it out, although I'm hearing reports and seeing things that it's like you can still kind of break it with a handful of things. But essentially, and the reason people kind of reference the Amit, because it was like the easiest thing to recreate, and one of the more like jaw-dropping things. But basically, you could inject different weapon frames into different weapon models. And so what people were doing is they were taking like the high impact shotgun frame from I'm blanking on the name of the shotgun right now. The one from Season of Opulence.
Is it Ragnarok or something like that?
Well, yeah,
Imperial
you
Decree.
Imperial
Oh,
Decree,
Imperial
or you
Decree.
could do the Ragnarok or whatever.
That's what I was doing it with.
Yeah. But essentially you could put that in an Amit, and so it was basically every shot was firing like a shotgun pellet spread's worth of bullets. And so when you have an auto rifle firing basically what Cerberus like wishes it could be.
8 shots, I think it was.
8 shots every time it fires or whatever. And so you're instantly melting Guardians in Crucible, and doing all kinds of other things where you're outputting way more damage than you should. And it was leading to like funky things where like if you were like laying in a champion and you could melt them faster than like the game was recognizing that you were doing damage. So like their health would like spring back, or they would like take all the damage and then die like 3 seconds later. So it led to a bunch of just crazy stuff. And then people started figuring out other things where you could take the split grenade launcher, Dead Messenger, and put that in like other weapons as well. And so now like you've got Forbearance that's firing 3 grenades and doing it still like traveling on the ground thing and then just like detonating everything. And so you're just getting like outrageous damage from weapons that are not supposed to be doing it. Some stuff didn't work. Like you could put Cranial Spike in like another scout rifle, but it wouldn't receive any of the benefits. Or like I was able to put a rocket launcher frame in a Commemoration, and it's not like every shot was like a rocket or something like that. So some stuff didn't really have any like crazy consequences. But then yeah, you had stuff with like the Amit AR2 where it was basically firing shotgun shots with every bullet, and so it led to outrageous damage numbers. People were able to like fry bosses instantaneously in like, people were doing like master Vault of Glass, like just completely butchering Atheon without even like blinking an eye. And so this also led to a bunch of controversy with like people were getting solo flawless completions of all these dungeons that they were never able to do because you have these kind of damage checks that normally prevent the average player from like one phasing the boss. And so now you have people like insta melting, and so that led to a bunch of like, well, now it devalues the people that have done it legit, and there should be, everyone thought they should be rollbacks, and anyone who earned these things sort of like insincerely should have them taken away. And we can talk about that a little bit, but that's kind of the gist of it, is like people were making illegal frames in weapons that shouldn't have them, and then you could also, what was the other part of it, people figured out too, you could put other perks on weapons that shouldn't have it.
So you could have a double Eagle's Edge sword, so you just go flying.
Or what I saw in PvP is you could put Mulligan on a GL, and as long as one portion of the shot didn't hit an enemy, it like counted as not hitting it, so it would refund your grenade. And so like one of my buddies, we admittedly, I went into a handful of like trials and PvP games, not with the expectation of like, oh, I'm going to finally go flawless. A couple of my buddies did, but it was like, let's be honest. But one of my buddies did manage to basically at infinite, like just shoot GL without ever having to like run out of ammo because he was technically not hitting anything. And so it led to like outrageous results in PvP and PvE, and everyone had their fun for a weekend, and but ultimately all of this was kind of like, well, is Bungie gonna like roll something back or kick these people or punish anyone? And they basically said on Friday evening, like, go nuts, we're gonna fix it eventually, but no one's gonna get in trouble for exploiting this. And so that sort of opened the floodgates to all of this.
Yeah, I think that was right on their part, obviously.
Yeah.
No one should be punished for using in-game exploits.
I agree. I think I would have. This is gonna be a hot take. I kind of wish they didn't say anything and were purposely vague so that people were kind of scared to do it the whole weekend.
So it wouldn't be so rampant.
And so like.
I feel like only a portion of the community would actually be worried not to, though. I when it first people were making videos, I was like, oh, they'll probably disable the guns. Like, I didn't really think much of it, and I wasn't able to get on anyway. And then they put out a thing going, oh, it doesn't matter, people won't get punished because it's an exploit, but it's not our fault, it's not on the, and so then I went on and did it, not because I thought, oh, I'll get banned, because that's how they've always been with exploits. Like, even with the casino trials stuff,
Oh,
they didn't ban anyone for doing that, and that's always been their policy, which I've liked, unlike other games. I don't know if you remember Anthem. There was a thing where you could farm the lower, like the one under the highest level thing for rewards, and people were farming that, and they banned people.
Right.
Which is
mental. Didn't Glad get banned?
Yeah. So it's like grinding master nightfalls instead of GM because it dropped better stuff for a period of time.
Right.
It's like, why would you ban someone for that? But that's always been their policy, so I never thought that. But I didn't come on for it just because I was like, oh, they'll probably disable them. But then they said, oh, it's the weekend. It's the weekend for them as well. So people are at home.
Right.
And they probably had poor sods coming in and trying to do stuff over the weekend to do a patch. But, I came on the Saturday and made an Amit with the aggressive frame. And then I also made a Regnant with an aggressive frame as well.
Got it. Okay.
So we were just doing the GM, which was the Battlegrounds on Europa, the one with the Shrieker at the end.
Oh,
and that was very funny going through that. And then we did a Ghost of the Deep run just because I needed another chance of the exotic, and I still haven't got the helmet.
Okay.
And just wanted to kill the boss instantly because it was really late. But no, I enjoyed it. It was funny. But yeah, I imagine there were, and I did see people complaining about, oh, there'll be people getting achievements that they shouldn't. And I agree to an extent, but it's a game. Who cares? That's where I've got in my life. I think maybe when I was like 15 or 16, I would have been like, oh, but like years ago. But yeah, it's a game. Grow up. I mean, I think you don't get as much for doing solo clears anymore anyway, like flawless solo clears,
Right.
I feel like the last dungeon where they properly pushed that was Prophecy, where you get the ghost, the sparrow, and the emblem. Now you just get an emblem and that's it. You don't really get any extra, and it's an emblem. So let people have their fun. I didn't touch PvP because I knew it'd just be a coin flip on who had better crafted randomness or which team had or hadn't got them. So I just didn't touch trials.
So one of the things that I kind of wanted to point out is it was a lot easier to pull this off. And I'm not saying it was impossible, but it was a hell of a lot easier to accomplish this on PC.
Yes.
Because it sort of required your system to kind of like chug. And so the more that you could like gank your system, and like people were like, I'm streaming 5 4K videos and downloading 3 games while I'm doing this, and I'm dropping my frames and purposely like maxing out my video card so that I'm struggling just to like even, and that made it a lot easier to actually induce the glitch on weapons. And so doing that on console was a lot harder. Now, people could do it. I saw videos of people doing it on like PS5.
I did it on console.
Right.
It was a lot easier to do the shotgun with something because of where they were located. But anything other than that, it was a lot difficult to do because of like you have the keypads for it, whereas on console you've got the D-pad of pressing things.
Exactly.
But with a mouse and keyboard, you can flick through the menus a lot quicker.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was a lot easier to accomplish on PC than console. Not impossible, but a lot easier. And I think that was unfortunate because I did jump into a few console matches, and I was like, because I have a PC. I actually have a crappy laptop that I was able to do it on because like that game barely runs on there. and I didn't really have to do much in order like to mess it up. But I was able to get it on there, and then I loaded it up on PC or on console, and there was definitely a lot less people in the console lobbies that had it because it was harder for them to pull off. And I think that's the one complaint I'd have about it is, if this is going to sound silly, if the bug were easier to pull off for everyone, then I would have been much more okay with a whole weekend of shenanigans. But there were some people that I think, like, there was even a guy in my clan who had it on, who on PC couldn't pull it off for some reason or another. And like if everyone could do it and everyone had an Amit that shot shotgun shots, then I think it would be okay because it'd be a little more like homogenized. But I think there were some people that just completely struggled, and I feel bad.
Doing the Amit thing was easy on console. It wasn't hard. And I know obviously on PC it was better if your system was bottlenecked and you had low frames and that sort of thing.
Right.
But I don't think that has as much to do with it as people realise, because, all right, it's 60 frames. PvE is 60 frames on like PS5 and the latest Xbox, I've forgotten the name. And then 120 in Crucible. But I did the Amit after like 3 tries, and the Regnant was like first try. I just flicked through my menus and
right.
And it was just pressing the right buttons rather than I think that was the problem with it. You had to sort of press them all at once rather than in an order.
Right.
But yeah, it was like a coin flip. Like my friend, he sat there for about 10 minutes trying to get a Regnant and to work, and it didn't.
Right.
For like 10, 15 minutes. But yeah, you could do it. I think people were just not trying enough, or didn't know, or didn't care. Like, you got to think there's a lot more people on console playing Destiny than there are on PC, like way more. And that's where most of the casuals are probably going to be.
Right. So yeah, just like, you know, I would say it was like if everyone could do it and it was a little bit, then it's like, okay, let the chaos ensue. But it definitely, this is going to sound silly, it was sort of like a have and have not kind of situation where some people just either didn't want to engage with it, and then their entire weekend of like, well, I want to play Trials normally, but I can't because
I just didn't touch, because I wouldn't have liked using it in PvP because it just would have felt weird. Not because it's like an advantage. I mean, there is that, but I don't like playing PvP with guns I don't normally use, and I don't use an Amit. So, and I knew that I'd be playing against or with people who would have them or not, and that would be more frustrating than, you know, being killed by them, is people on my team dying, or a coin flip of who has them, who hasn't. But,
exactly.
But yeah, with the Prometheus lens weekend, Xur sold it. So basically, if you for some reason didn't have the legendary shards for it, was the only reason you couldn't get it.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the difference between these two events is, they made it so that everyone could do it on with Xur and get Prometheus lens. And so it sort of homogenized everything. But on this, it was still kind of like, you know, and I get that, like I said, I did maybe 6 or 7 matches the entire weekend in PvP. And I was like, okay, I got my fill. I got the chuckles out of it, but it was also like not that interesting to me overall, and so I just kind of like stopped after that. And so yeah, it was interesting. It still sounds like there's people that can find weird bugs with like swapping illegal perks around, and there's still some stuff going on, and like as a result, like adept weapons are not currently recraftable, and there's still kind of residual bugs, and they kind of mainly fixed it, but it still sounds like there's some work to be done. And I think you brought up Mapador too. Like, and I this is something that I want to acknowledge and don't want to shy away from, is like there were people working on it over the weekend, and that like shout outs to those guys, because someone was
ruined.
Yeah, someone like, and that I could see that happening, because I've had this happen before where you're getting ready to leave on Friday afternoon and then something hits the fan and you're just like, well, there's my weekend now. I'm going to be at work and dealing with this the whole weekend. And before you realize that it's 13 hours in on Saturday and you just want to go home and cry. but you can't because you're trying to get this resolved, and everyone's trying to get it resolved. And like, so I shout outs to those guys and gals working on this, and I really do appreciate that they made every attempt to get it resolved over the weekend, and they didn't have to resort to just like flat out banning all crafted weapons, which could have been like, I don't know how easy it would have been to turn that off. I mean, we've seen them turn off individual weapons and exotics before, but I don't know if, I can't imagine there's a checkbox that exists in the game where it's like, turn off all crafted weapons for the weekend, but like, I think that's what everyone kind of expected them to do as like,
yeah, that's what I thought they were going to do.
The stopgap, and they didn't do that. So they didn't completely ruin the experience. Like if you had a normal group of guys that wanted to just run a raid and didn't want to have to resort to cheesing everything, like you could still do that with the weapons that you had. Or if you wanted to be a crazy psychopath with an ammit that shouldn't have been firing shotgun pellets, you could also do that. Like they left it open. So ultimately, I would say the game wasn't impacted functionally too much. And that was something a couple of the clanmates pointed out, is like, these weapons are surprisingly stable. Like they're not just crashing the game when you use an ammit that's firing shotgun pellets. So that's like kind of a testament to the quality of where the game's at now in terms of functionality.
I mean, I guess we could have seen that already with like cheaters where they just spam heavy everywhere and like,
that's
infinitely.
True. That's true.
But yeah, having loads and loads and loads of people do it in one instance, obviously,
right,
quite different.
So
you could potentially have 12 in one lobby.
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of functionality,
great segue.
Yeah, I saw my opportunity and I took it. Destiny's been the victim of some DDoS attacks lately, which has been impacting the servers pretty heavily.
Yes.
They don't know from who yet, but it is affecting the functionality of the game. It's not Bungie's fault, but they are a victim of this particular situation. I just saw a video of this poor guy playing King's Fall, and they got booted out like seconds before they killed Oryx. It was quite sad, but
yep.
Stuff is going on, and it's kind of it's interesting. And I want to say this isn't the first time this has happened, right? Something like this has happened.
I can't remember off the top of my head if it's been Destiny specific, but obviously, like, I don't even remember. Was it 2012? Sony and briefly Microsoft were the victim of mass DDoSing around Christmas. And it does happen.
that was like 2014.
2014, all right. Yeah.
Because Sony, because I remember that was
PS4.
Yeah, and that was because Sony was going to release the interview movie or something. Supposedly that was like the catalyst. And
I thought it was people that were DDoSing because they were angry that people were playing games instead of spending time with their family at Christmas.
Is that what it was?
It was because of that, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I believe so. Correct. Like, people can... Well, there aren't comments on Spotify, but... feel free to, I don't know, fax me if I'm wrong, but...
fax me.
Actually, it's yes, I think, but I think you brought up like that was the entire PlayStation network and not just Destiny. I mean, we've had weird server instabilities kind of like this in the past where people just get kicked constantly. I don't know if it's ever been this egregious and this consistent, and I don't think they've ever just flat out like confirmed that it's a DDoS attack. I think this is this is a new one.
I mean, for one, you can't announce it like that because then it shows, oh, we've got a hole in our system,
Right.
And you kind of don't want to do that. But I feel like they're doing it now because people would just complain about, oh, your servers are rubbish.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think... But then I think it also means that you get people who are angry with that person. So I'm guessing the person or people doing it are either they have to be fans of Destiny. Like, there's no way some random person goes, right, we're going to DDoS Bungie for no reason. Like, well, we don't even play Destiny. Like, why would you bother? People aren't like that. They're going to have a reason, and it's going to be do we think that it's because of the crafted weapons, or do we think it just happened to line up perfectly with it?
Well, in their Twitter, they said it's not related. Well, it wasn't happening because of their fixes to.
No, but I mean the person DDoSing them is
this is like the last straw for them, and this is why they're attacking
they were like,
them.
"Oh, you fixed it too quick." I don't know what their reasoning would have been, but it. But yeah,
I don't think it has anything to do with crafted. I think, I don't know, knowing like this community and like people giving death threats to developers, I don't even know if it has to have any specific reason besides the fact that it's Destiny.
Yeah. It could have just been someone who's recently...
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, it could just be someone who recently was banned silently and then they're super butthurt about it. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, or they got angry with the pronouns in the final shape reveal.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's like something that would actually happen.
I believe that. I can't wait till people realise that isn't a Bungie specific thing, and that most companies have to do that now. Like,
what was even the pronoun thing in the final shape?
When people's names popped up of the developers, they had their pronouns underneath.
Yeah, but they did that during Lightfall too.
Yeah, and they did, and people got annoyed.
That's been
it's just like a policy in most companies now.
Yeah, I thought you were referring to like something in the game had pronouns.
No.
Because what is it? There's some people that got really upset in Starfield
you pick
where
your
you can
pronouns.
Which is like right, because it's like it's a drop down menu. Like, who cares? Like, that's great.
Wait,
now you could, and it's a role playing game. So shouldn't part of the role that you play allow you to be like what person you want to play as in the universe? Like, shouldn't people more be happy about that? Because it's like it's another variable to your like experience. Like, I don't know. People need to pick their battles more accordingly. Like, that is
people need to get angry at things that they should actually be angry about.
Right. Something that you don't even have to engage with. Like, you can just use the default and move on. Like, get over yourself.
Rob, you and the guys were playing Crota Master.
Yeah,
did that affect your
yes and
situation?
no. So we managed to get one run in for the challenge. And we were going for a second because it's the weapons are on a knockout system, which is awesome. So we were like, well, let's just run it with a second character so we can get a second adept weapon. And after like the second attempt, it started like bugging out, and then it eventually just kicked us all, and we're like, yeah, let's just do it another night. Because it was like for like 20 or 30 minutes before we started playing, we were having issues as well. And so it was like, we took that as a sign that the Destiny gods are like, you get one weapon tonight, move on. So we did that, and then a couple of us were like, let's do a GM, and then we like loaded into it and got booted. We're like, okay, that's it for the night.
All right, well, you cut your losses.
Yeah, exactly. Like we did get one challenge in. Like I'm ecstatic to no end because the one adept weapon that I wanted, I managed to get the Fang of Your adept. So like I'm super content. If I don't get any of the other adept ones, like I'm totally okay with it. But it just on kind of like the level of the game functioning or not functioning, it's really bad. Like, I don't think I've gone more than like 20 or 30 minutes without getting booted. I've only been able to successfully finish a handful of matches like consistently where it seems like, or maybe I'll get through the match, but like half the team gets kicked. And it's rough. The game is virtually unplayable. Like, I don't feel like trying to do dungeons. No one in my clan wants to do raids because it's like, it's not a question of if, it's like, when are we going to get booted?
Yikes. Yeah, and this has been going on since... When did this start?
Seemingly like the weekend. Like, it seemed like it's Sunday evening is when I interpreted that it started occurring. But it could have been sooner or later, or like it could just be anecdotal. Like, maybe I happened to get disconnected and I'm like, it's a sign. Like, after they came out, like, no, maybe I just got disconnected. But
shoot. Map, did you have any experiences?
I did not, but it stopped me from coming on this week.
Oh yeah,
because I saw people talking about it, and I've only got so much time like in the evening, and I just think, well, I don't want to
fight
sit
the servers in your free
yeah,
time?
I don't want to sit there, get halfway through something, get kicked, or try and play the new PvP game mode, get kicked, and just get annoyed about it. I just thought, well, you know, I'm not angry at, you know, Bungie, you know, it's not like it's out of their hands, really. It's pointless getting angry in that. Get angry towards people doing it. But yeah, that's what I mean. It still affects everyone, and it made me not come on. But yeah, it's not good, and
No.
I don't know why we're at this point again with people in the community doing shit like that.
I know. It's really sad. I hope this doesn't like start a ongoing trend of this happening more often.
Yeah. I just want to play the game. That's all. I don't want to play with broken guns if it's going to cause the game to not function. I know they're not related, but it just feels like it's a perfect storm of shenanigans.
All right, you guys want to talk about Crota's End in good news?
Yeah.
All right. So Crota's End came out a couple weeks ago, but Master Mode came out this week.
Right.
But Crota's End is back in Destiny 2, and so it's remastered, right? So like visually the graphics are different.
Yep.
There's a new, quote unquote, new mechanic that goes throughout the entire raid with the idea of the chalice. Obviously, spoilers for the raid if you care about that sort of thing and haven't done it for whatever reason.
It's been out for a month. There's no spoilers.
That's what I figured. But
yeah.
The chalice, you play hot potato with it, and you like get enlightened, so you can do certain things, and that like permeates throughout every encounter, and that's kind of like the main core mechanic of the whole thing.
Right.
But that's like, I think that's, I didn't do Crota's End in D1, but correct me if I'm wrong, that is the main difference, right?
Yeah, so in D1, in Crota's End, only on normal, during the Crota encounter, your health would not come back. You had a debuff called Presence of Crota, which is still here. It just does a completely different thing in this game. But you could pick up a chalice in the middle, and that would allow you to heal your health, and you would pass it around to each other. So like, the way the original encounter would start is you'd stand on the middle stone thing, and it would cause the oversoul to, or the throne behind him to rebuild, and then he would spawn. But at the time, there would be like dozens of acolytes and knights that would sort of swarm where you started, and so there's a pretty good chance that you were taking a bunch of damage at the beginning. And so what you would do is then someone would go grab the chalice and you'd all heal, and then that chalice was there. I don't think that it existed in hard mode, so it only existed on normal in the center. And so it was like, that was kind of an attempt to make the raid a little bit harder, as you couldn't heal. And so everyone, and there were only a handful of helmets that would allow you to heal your health. This is during the Dark Below of D1. So there was like, think about, we only had like 6 exotics per character, and there was like Light Beyond Nemesis was like the helmet that you needed, because picking up an orb would regenerate your health. And so the idea is like, someone would use their super, generate a bunch of orbs, and then everyone would grab one of those orbs because you had one of the exotic helmets that would heal you back. Like, that's kind of the level of like what we had to do back then. Or if you had Red Death, you would have that equipped. But ultimately, most Crota's End LFGs required that you had Yallarhorn, because you needed to use G-Horn to take his shield down. Although I didn't have one, but I had Truth, which worked just as well because it had 3 in the
Truth
chamber.
was good.
Or
the rocket launcher.
Yeah, it was my first exotic, by the way, way back when. It was my first exotic in the game. But so these were dark times. This is like very, very early on in D1's life, where we were like cobbling anything you could to have a quote unquote build just to stay alive, to be able to complete the encounter. So, yeah, so the chalice was there just to give you health back, but now it's actually the primary mechanic of the game, or of the raid. And it exists in every encounter where, like you said, Scotty, you get enlightened, and that allows you to engage and interact with certain things. Like in the first encounter, you turn the lamps on with it. And then in the second encounter, it allows you to pick up the sword. And then in the third encounter, it allows you to go through barriered walls that you need to in order to kill the wizard. And so, and then in the fourth encounter, you have to use it to kill the oversoul, right? So like it's constantly iterating, which I appreciate. Like in terms of kind of like learning the raid for the first time, it at least like forces you to do something different with the enlightened buff each time. And then ultimately you can pass it back and forth, which ends up becoming handy for certain parts of the encounters as well, where you don't necessarily want to be enlightened, but you also want to keep moving the chalice around to make sure that it stays with your team. So it's not just like one basic thing where everyone gets enlightened and then like you don't have to do the encounter, like use the chalice anymore. Like you still need to do something with it most of the time.
Yeah. So while we're talking about the chalice, I'm just going to address the elephant in the room again as far as the chalice goes. I think the biggest problem with the chalice is the stupid elemental balls and the strand balls. And I don't really understand the logic of let's map the chalice transfer button to the same button that is pick up balls, revive, and reload.
I think it just falls at an unfortunate time of the seasonal mods.
Yes.
I mean, all the transfer things in all the raids are the same input.
Right. It's always the interact button.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I've had this in PvP where I've reloaded, like, slid round the corner and reloaded, behind cover, and picked one up. Not just, which is very fucking annoying. But yeah, I think it's just an unfortunate timing in the season where everyone's going to have those mods.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that totally. But at the same time, also, I mean, it's also frustrating when someone dies with a chalice and then you have to, like, stand in the exact right spot to, like, do the thing that you want to do because they're both right on top of each other and they're both the same button. And that's kind of annoying.
Yeah, and the priority of, I think it always prioritizes revive over picking up the chalice, which is
unfortunate because you have less time to pick up the chalice than you do to revive generally.
Correct. Yeah. And so you're absolutely right. And because Scotty, you ran it with us on day 1 or technically day 2. And that was something that we, after attempting the first encounter a bunch of times, we all just turned the ball generation mods off. And I have left them off because I don't really like them in general. Like, it's a neat idea. I kind of wish that we could just shoot them and have them like almost like Warmind cells where they would just like in an area of effect around them affect, but I wish that we didn't have to interact with them and pick them up and throw them because of exactly what you're saying. And like, I find myself not using and engaging with that mod mechanic at all this season because I would much rather not be frustrated in the raid than be able to throw a ball that causes scorch on a bunch of ads when I'm running strikes. Like, one of those things is way more important to me than the other. But the other one could be interesting. I just find it so frustrating that I'm not using it. And this ultimately leads me to believe that I think this is epitomizes what I understand to be probably one of the problems with the game cycle. And this is not necessarily like a Bungie specific thing. I think this exists in all like design spaces, even in engineering of all facets, where you obviously have one team that's doing the artifact and mods, and then you have another team that's doing the designing the raid and the mechanics. And I get the feeling that those groups don't talk as much as they should because, like you said,
I imagine the raid was made way before the mods were made.
Right, exactly. And the mod people probably should have spent some time in the raid and been like, oh, this is going to be problematic because there's this weird prioritization of like there needs to be like a weird redistribution of like hierarchy of what we prioritize, or we should be able to like change it in menu. And I know that's probably way easier said than done, but it's something that we should have agency over, where I always want to be able to interact with the mechanic before I want to res you. or pick up the ball. Like, I want to pick up the ball last. I should be able to do all these other things before the ball, because the ball is not what's going to keep the raid going or keep me alive. It's just a stupid thing that I can pick up and interact with and play with. And like, it was an oversight that obviously did not seem like it was tested very well. And it's unfortunate, because it's a neat idea. Because I know when in the one TWAB where they talked about it, they were kind of super excited, where they're like, yeah, it's basically Tingles, but for every element, and we're really excited, and we spent a lot of time developing it. And I do believe that, and it's a neat idea, but it's just really unfortunate that it happened at the same time as this really important chalice mechanic that like dictates the entire raid.
Yeah, it is very frustrating, because like you said, it is in every encounter. It's not like kind of like a one and done sort of situation. Right. It's like, okay, I can excuse that if this is like, 1/4 of the raid, but it is every encounter.
Right.
It's always kind of something you're thinking about. And it doesn't like ruin the whole experience or anything, but it is an oversight for sure. And it does kind of affect the experience every now and then.
Right.
But other than that, as someone who did Crota's End in D1, what do you think of the revamp?
You can go for it. You can go first, Matt, if you want.
So I've always had the opinion that though it was a short raid and there were a lot of problems with it, Crota's End was more fun than VOG.
Ooh.
Okay, that's a hot take.
And I've always thought VOG was really boring. And the concept is really cool, but the raid itself, part of the areas of it are really bland. Yeah. And I'm glad they changed up some of the Vex aesthetic for Destiny 2. Some of it was nice. But some, like, you look at, Aphion's, say, throne room. He's got the big glass thing at the back. Other than that, it's just another cave. And I've always felt it was quite bland in some areas, and I think Crota was more fun. I know it was broken as mess. I've soloed it before, like it is complete. You could just skip the second encounter,
right?
Mm-hmm. But I've always thought it was quite fun and just interesting. And I think this cements it for me that it's a better raid than VOG.
And just like in terms of like aesthetic.
I just think in all of it, I think how it presents the Crota. The aesthetic is nice. It's quite unique, and it was unique at the time as well. And I think the mechanics are far more interesting. And I like the first encounter now that they've added the Shadowkeep BDSM stuff to it.
I've never heard the swinging like pendulums referred to as BDSM related, but
it's not high BDSM stuff. That's what Eric and Drifter are doing when we're not doing Tive.
Oh,
Tive
that's
stuff.
so true. They had that little conversation in the season where Drifter's talking to him, and Drifter's into that.
You got the rolling pin, the death rolling pins out, but yeah, I think they've. All right, VOG was the first raid that they made, or supposedly, because of that other King's Fall rumor stuff theory, but and then Crota's End came after, and then now they've VOG got remade first, and then they've had hindsight of, right, this probably needs to be changed differently, things like that. They've had hindsight and the game's in a different spot. But I think it was a better sort of remaster.
Okay. Fair.
Yeah, and
Rob, response.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Finish your thought.
The music's always better. The VOG, the Aphion fight's kind of boring. It's like the one bit of Destiny boss music that I think is not that good.
Interesting.
It's quite ambient and not, I think, intense as it should be. And then the only thing I'll give VOG that has come out of VOG, other than the weapons and things like that, is the sound that the oracles make. That is good sound design.
I don't completely agree with you, and that's totally fine, because at the end of the day, all of this is super subjective.
Yeah.
I do think that I will always probably have a soft spot for Vault, and it's not because it was the first raid I completed. I actually think the first raid I completed was Crota's End, and then I went back and did Vault.
Right.
Because the first time I did Vault, I actually had a really, really bad experience that I don't want to get into. But I do like that, like, thematically, the raid has always, to me, felt like it was supposed to be this very, like, hectic, just in your face, like, almost, for lack of a better term, like, obnoxious fights where you're just like, I absolutely love in the bridge encounter when you have the thrall crawling up the side of the wall and like just constantly swarming you when you're covering the plates. Like, I love that idea, and I love this sort of like just chaoticness of the fight, and that it's like a little bit lighter on mechanics because it's meant to be more of like, you really do feel kind of like, you know, the six that originally went down there, part of Eris's fire team, like they failed because they were overwhelmed by the thrall, and you kind of get that sense. Like, I would say it sort of accomplishes it from that thematic standpoint very, very well. Like, okay, you can see why they failed, because they were just swarmed and they couldn't handle it, you know, and I love that, and I think Crota's End has always done that really well. I've been one of those that I've kind of always liked Crota's End. I don't think it's a perfect raid, but I after now playing it in D2, I think it is perfected in what it was, and I think it's every encounter it's better than its D1 counterpart. Like, the mechanics are more engaging. There's more things to do. Everyone has to kind of participate for the most part. Like, Ute, I think, is probably the most changed and most interesting. People love the fact that now swords are like a relevant DPS choice in Crota's fight itself. Like, that's exciting. Like, all the changes that they've done are good. I think the spirit of the raid has still been mostly preserved in terms of like the hectic chaos. And I like that the chalice is more than just a thing that's in normal Crota that you actually have to like engage with and do something with, and it means something. So I would say for the most part, it's like improved in every way. Going back to the Vault of Glass thing, I like the kind of weird cave aesthetic, and I like kind of the time travel-y stuff, and I agree the music is definitely a little more muted. I do like the Vex music that's in there, but I do agree that it's a little more ambient, and when you compare it to the almost like dubstep techno that you get in Crota's End, especially when you're building the bridge in the kind of the first encounter, like with the lanterns, and it's that really like heavy bass like drum where it's just like it's building up, and then now you're just like there's just nonstop thrall running at you from left, right, and front, and it's like perfect the way the music sort of like balances out like the tone. And I think that's something we've talked about this in the past, and I've gushed about it, but like especially in vanilla D1, the music that was sort of adapted with some of the levels was so good and captured perfectly like what was going on in that encounter. And I'm so glad that they kind of preserved it and kept it in D2, because I think it did it so well. And it's something that should not have been changed. I know that they kind of changed the music in like the second and fourth encounters a little bit, but that main Crota's theme, when you finally pick up the sword and start damaging them, that plays like that's still in there, but it just plays now when you start actually damaging them as a group. Like, that's like one of my favorite tracks that like you can't, it's not like in anything people have like been able to isolate the track, and you can find it on YouTube and stuff. Kind of like the Dawning stuff that we were talking about a couple weeks ago. But ultimately I think it kind of successfully nailed it in every sense. And it's funny because we have our clan has gotten it down pretty well. And Scotty, you've participated in a handful of these raids too, but like we're able to get through Crota's End now in like 45 minutes, which is faster than we can get through Ghost of the Deep, which is kind of interesting. No,
That's
but
just
it's
that dungeon though.
Right, exactly. Because, you know, Ghost of the Deep, I don't want to devalue, because I think aesthetically it's one of the coolest dungeons we've ever gotten. And like from like a narrative standpoint, like they're trying to resurrect Crota, which is, or not Crota, Oryx, which is awesome from a story standpoint, but no one wants to do that dungeon anymore because that whole middle section is so long and so boring, and there's no way to bypass any of it.
And then she has too much health.
Right. And even Root of Nightmares, that whole middle section where you have to constantly get the light and dark thing, and it's like cool because Nezarec's like taunting you the whole time. But after you do it once or twice, you do not want to have to do it every time you do that raid. Whereas this, like, as silly as it sounds, it kind of cuts all the bullshit out of there, and it's just one encounter after the other, and it's just like, in terms of like action pack, it's like perfect.
As offensive in that as Ghost of the Deep, but I agree.
Sure.
Ghost of the Deep is just too long.
Right. And again, the first time you do it or the second time you do it, it's awesome, right? It's so cool that you're like navigating this underwater thing to this crashed ship, and then the punchline is you find Oryx's corpse. They're like,
and then the motif, the King's Fall motif plays as well. Which is
it's so cool, but then it's like after you do it the third or fourth time, you're like, I do not want to do this anymore.
That's fair. All right, I'm going to play devil's advocate really quick to make this interesting, because that's what I do.
Sure.
I actually really like the transitional encounters, and I will say I have not played Ghost of the Deep, so I don't know how egregious this is. But
yeah, then I don't think you should weigh in on it. I'm just kidding.
Oh, well, I mean, I like the Root of Nightmares one, for example. I think it adds to like the spectacle of the whole raid. It makes it feel like a raid, if that makes sense.
Sure.
No, I agree with you.
If it's like one encounter after another, it's good for like if you're running it like multiple times over and over again. I totally know what you mean, but it almost doesn't feel like a raid anymore without some of that like spectacle-inducing stuff like that, where you're running around this massive space and Nezarec's taunting you. I think that's really cool. And I think that's one of the things I would have liked to have seen in Crota's End is something like, I would have liked to have seen some more of the catacombs or something like that, and I would have wanted to hear some like, I don't know, like Crota dialogue or something. I don't even know if there is any Crota dialogue. And but yeah, that's just me.
Yeah, no, and I get it. I think there's certainly a middle ground, and I think it was like Luke Smith talked about. He did like a Q&A talking about Vault of Glass, and he talked about the sort of like interim, transitions to each of the encounters, and he sort of wanted them to have these moments where like, okay, you're moving to the next thing, and like the best example is when you complete the Templar and transition. You have to go through like the little area and then the Gorgon's maze, and then you finally get to like the vault itself, and that's kind of a long jumping puzzle section in the maze itself, and the idea was he wanted to have, and I'm super Omega paraphrasing because I don't remember how even long ago this interview was. It might have been during D1, but basically he wanted to have those little like cooldown spots in the raid, so you can like talk about the loot that you got and talk about how awesome, like, when I did this cool clutch thing with the rocket and I was able to kill that, and then I was able to res you, and then we finished the encounter. Like, he wanted those to have kind of a transitional moment where you can just decompress as a team before you get to the next like hectic thing. And I think and that's why I think Vault of Glass has a good number of those that aren't too egregious in terms of time. And the Gorgon's Maze, I think, is a perfect example of, once you have a good team and know what you're doing, you can zip through that section and not have to like, if you are doing like, okay, let's just get our 3 done for the evening, or for the week, I should say, you can do that super efficiently, and you don't have to kind of go through it kind of like a formal, maybe an LFG team might have to make sure everyone gets through it. But it's still there. Whereas like Root of Nightmares, you cannot, unless you're like sword skating and doing kinds of, crazy stuff with
fun gun, double Eager's Edge.
Yeah, double Eager's Edge and all that kind of stuff. Like, you have to do the super long transitions for both between the first and second, and the second and third. And even the third to fourth is a little bit long, but like, those don't get any shorter. You can't really bypass anything. And like, I get from a raid thematic standpoint, but at a certain point, if you've gone through the raid a couple dozen times, which if you're trying to get the title, you're going to do, it gets really old really fast. And I do agree that there should be more thematic elements to a raid in order to call it a raid, because Crota's End lacks all of that completely. Like, it is probably the most extreme example.
King's Fall had it right where the long one is at the start.
Right.
Because that builds, and then you get to totems. But I think imagine if that one was where the jump between Golgoroth and the daughters were. Right. And it was even longer, and it was the ship thing as well as the door.
Right, but the piston wall you can bypass super
what
quickly.
I mean. So imagine if they were swapped round.
Right.
It would feel worse, and I think that's the middle ground that they need to start doing is the intro bit, or the longest break is not in the middle of the raid and should be at the start.
Right.
Yeah. I think also what would help is if the transitional encounters, if they can come up with a way to make it so that if you get really good at it, it gets faster, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think that would improve. That would be a good middle ground too.
Yeah, and that's why, like, in Ghost of the Deep, it would be nice if, so, like, there's the kind of the transition after what the first encounter to the second encounter is, like, the long section where you're doing a bunch of, like, underwater dives and things like that. And, like, the first time you do it, it's super cool. Second time you do it, it's pretty cool. But then it's, like, it becomes such a slog. And everyone always kind of agrees that, like, it would be cool if after you've completed it 4 or 5 times, there's, like, a tunnel that opens up that allows you to just, like, underwater, you could just dive straight to that next encounter rather than have to, like, do it. Because, like, again, if you're trying to take someone through for the first time, you want them to see all that stuff. They want to pick up all the little lore bits where Xivu Arath is, like, talking to Oryx and all that stuff. Like, I think that's totally fine. But there needs to be some kind of, like, quicker way of doing it.
Like in a hive raid, you have one of those rune doors, and once you've done it 3 times, you can input the code for that. Or if it's a fallen one, it's a transporter, and once you've done it 3 times, you can go through that. And then you can't go through it if someone in your fire team hasn't done it that many times. Again,
Yeah, you get like
that.
You get
that
3
gatekeeping, but I don't know.
Yeah, but I that's true. You'll have LFG teams where it's like must have bypass key or something. Yeah. But that's just it though too, right? Is if you are trying to be an elitist and you're trying to get through stuff quickly, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, okay, I just want to do 3 runs really quick to get my loot and have another chance at getting the exotic at the end, right? Because at the end of the day, that's why you're going to do repeat farming, is you want to get the trace rifle, or you're just trying to get the helmet or something like that. And so you're just trying to find a team that knows what they're doing, and you're not going to lollygag, and like you just like you want to be able to. And I think that's not an unreasonable thing to say, you know, must have bypass keys so that we can get through it as quickly as possible. I don't think that's an unreasonable. And I would say Spire the Watcher is pretty egregious too. It's not as bad, but that whole when you're navigating, like, all of these things are fun to figure out the first couple times that you do it, but when you're trying to do like a solo run,
I don't think Spires is as offensive again because it's in between the first and second part. The jump between the boss, the first boss and the second, isn't that.
It's not that bad. I'm talking about from like opening to first encounter.
What I mean. I feel they're not as bad because it's the first encounter.
Yeah,
but
you're right.
I do get what you mean though. It is quite long still.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to like continue on the negativity train too.
No,
much,
I don't think we're being negative. I think these are.
I think it's constructive.
Yeah,
I think
constructive.
They are,
Constructive. Okay. All right, so then I'll continue with my little statement here. So I don't have any connection to like Destiny 1, like nostalgia-wise, as far as like Crota's End goes. So this is kind of I have a little bit of a different perspective on this raid, I think, than you guys do.
Sure.
Because you guys obviously quite loved it in the first game. I think that Crota's End, as far as So I'll preface by saying I do really enjoy playing it, obviously, because I've played it 4 or 5 times with you guys.
Yeah,
it is fun.
Yeah,
it's a good time. I think as far as raids go, though, I think Destiny's come a long way in terms of raids, and I do think it's on kind of the weaker end as far as raids goes.
Oh, definitely.
If we're putting like Crota's End up against like Last Wish or something, I think I think Destiny's come a long way. It's pretty mechanically light, and I'm someone who I enjoy a good raid with light mechanics. Like I love Scourge of the Past; it's one of my favorites, but it's not super in depth. And I think one of my problems also is I don't really love the environment too much, as far as like the environment design and stuff like that. Like one problem I have, I don't like that Ute and Crota take place in the exact same room.
Sure.
Like,
yeah, I get
it feels
that,
kind of small as far as like a raid goes. It's like, I know that's kind of like a small complaint too, because it's not like a mechanical thing or whatever. It's kind of perhaps a nitpick, but it is kind of a bummer to get to Ute and then get to the final boss and then you don't even move. It's literally the same arena as the first boss. But I don't know. It is short. It's pretty, it's not super in depth. I don't love the aesthetic too much because I feel like I don't get to see enough of it. And I'm so used to like Destiny 2 raids where they've just made so much more progress. It feels like a step back. And obviously it is a step back because it's literally a reprised one from however many years ago. But that's kind of what I think.
You're not wrong about any of that stuff.
I agree.
Go for it.
Yeah, no, I think it was comparing it. What I mainly do is compare it to Vogue because they came out around the same time, and I imagine they were made around the same time as well.
Yeah.
Unless you want to believe that other theory, but yeah. And people always go, "Oh, Vogue, it was the first raid. It was really good." And it's like, yeah, it was the first raid. It's probably the weakest out of all of them now, especially that Crota's been remade.
Yeah, there's been a lot of progress made.
Definitely.
And even comparing it to Vogue, though, I feel like Crota's and some of the encounters don't have the same, like, I don't know if this sounds stupid, but like the same kind of cool factor that some of the other raid encounters do. Like, I think, for example, like the boss fight with Atheon, I think is awesome. Like, you have like the Aegis, and you're like playing hot potato with that, jumping through time and stuff, and you have to like, you're on like Mars in like a different time, and you're like, you have to like hold off a whole wave of Vex until someone comes and saves you. I think that whole like concept is very cool, and I don't think any of the encounters in Crota's End really have that same like epic feeling.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with everything that you're saying, and I don't fundamentally disagree with anything that you're saying either. I think in terms of raid mechanics, it's pretty light. If you look at how it was in the original D1, it's so much of an improvement that it's not even funny. And I think with what they changed, they did the least amount to like I'll say kind of like, and I mentioned this earlier, sort of like the spirit of the raid, like what they were trying to go for from like a thematic standpoint of it being this like hectic, you're just getting swarmed constantly. Like, I don't think you could make more advanced mechanics, certainly, but then at a certain point, are you compromising what the intention of the raid was supposed to be?
Yeah.
Now
then it's no longer Crota's End at that point.
And I might also sound like I'm being because like it's important to also look at kind of the contextual standpoint of like the timeline. Because then it's also easy to compare it to King's Fall because that was the next raid that we got in D1, and it was much more mechanic heavy, but I would say a little bit lighter on the swarming aspect, if you will. I'll kind of maybe call it that. But I think that's a stark contrast. I will say King's Fall also has the same problem where the sister or the daughters and Oryx occur in the same arena.
Yeah, that's true.
And same with King's Fall, but it feels bigger for some reason. It
does.
But that's like a weird.
I mean, they are bigger rooms as well.
They are, yeah. But I will say, comparing it to Vault of Glass as like the first 2 raids that we got, and they were released 3 months apart from each other. I think that's an important thing to remember. Again, this is all kind of like contextual timeline of the rules weren't set in place of what a raid needed to be. The community had not done a good job of understanding what we wanted from raids either, right? Here we have Vault of Glass, which, like you said, Scotty, was meant to be more methodical and had sort of these like narrative pieces of, you're fighting through time so that the Guardians don't get lost in time, and you're pulling the Aegis out of different timelines so you can use it to like make your own fate, right? It's really, really cool. And there's very like iconic things that like resonate forever with Destiny, because it's like that was the first raid that we got. And then it's like it seems like they were trying something different, and they probably were made at the same time. And obviously there's also all of the stories that we hear about what the development cycle was like, all the changes that they did make to the game at the last minute, supposedly. Like I don't want to get into that. Like I think we've kind of talked about it in the past, and what is rumor and what isn't, and why people left the company, and all the things that changed in the vanilla D1 story, and all the problems that people have with it. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel in that. But I kind of get the feeling that like they needed to get something out. They may have had intentions of there being longer transition points, but ultimately they just had to kind of condense it down and get something out, because like I don't quite know when they were working on Dark Below. Obviously it was before vanilla D1 released, but there wasn't much time to take feedback from Vault of Glass and like iterate on Crota's End. Like they just
the theory is that Crota's End and King's Fall were made as one raid.
And, I've heard that.
And that because King's Fall was delayed, like the whole of the Taken King was moved as a DLC. That they made VOG to replace it as the raid.
Right. Yeah, and I know there's like the original story was like the vanilla D1 story had us finding Rasputin on the what's Crota's
Dreadnought.
Works the Dreadnought. And you can see in the original, one of the original vanilla D1 trailers, you can see the Dreadnought. So there was probably at some point some intention to have the Dreadnought. I don't know if I agree or completely believe that it was meant to be one huge raid that they had to split up.
There was evidence of it being left in like out of bounds stuff, but I mean that's like,
Yeah, no, like, and it may be. I could be convinced if I saw some of those things and there, but it's just ultimately it's all speculation, and it kind of does feel that way when you see and maybe part of the mechanic was meant to be, but then they didn't really feel that it fit with the rest, so they just kind of pulled it out and they kind of took what they had together. Because if you ask me, like if you want to talk about more egregious, I think Root of Nightmares feels more like the first, second, and fourth encounter feel like a dungeon, and then they added the third encounter, which has nothing to do with the other 3 encounters, and then that's your raid. And I feel like that's even more bizarre in terms of like design.
I have a question for you guys. Was Crota always as much of a threat as he is in the original?
No.
I'd say yes and no, depending on what you were doing.
That's fair. Yeah. Because so where you all stand on the crystal to form like the throne behind him, that used to have a solid wall. And so you would just kind of the general pattern is he would kind of revolve around that platform, that stage, but everyone would kind of stay there until he got into position, and then you would go run out on the left and right side, immediately kill the sword bearer, pick up the sword, and then go to damage. And then once damage was done and the sword despawned, you'd go back into that room, which had the protective glass, and he couldn't damage you. So you're like, I would say 80% of the encounter, you're standing behind glass. And supposedly, I don't know, like, I've done it before. It seems like kind of like people saw things that didn't, but like if you pointed or emoted at him, he would like point at you. supposedly.
No, that was because he would lift his hand to do the attack,
Right.
But you're not there, so he wouldn't do it.
Exactly, and that's what it was. But it looks like he points at you when you emote at him. But
that's cool.
But for that 20% where you have to kill the sword bearer, he is constantly frying you, and I want to say he did more damage back then, or I think we were just more squishy back then because you couldn't put.
If you were a sword bearer and you didn't time it right with the people shooting the rockets, he would just kill you.
Right.
Like if you jumped up and he wasn't downed.
Right. So
he would just slap you.
So most of the time, the strategy was you would be an arc hunter, where if you crouched, you would go invis, and so you'd crouch on the rock and say, "Okay, I'm in position, down him," and you coordinate, a 3-2-1, and that would cause you to jump up on there. His shield would come down, he'd kneel, and you'd slap him a bunch of times. You would drop the sword, knife him, and that would allow you to go invisible again because that was one of the things that you could select from your nodes. And then you'd pick up the sword again, be invisible. That would give you time to kind of go back down and crouch, and then you could shoot him with rockets. So most of the time, if you were the hunter, you were the sword bearer because you had invisibility effects on arc. And again, this is before Void Hunter was a thing. And so they made it. But now they did change things in Age of Triumph where bubble, like weapons of light, actually would buff the sword damage. So then it became a strategy of a Void Titan would go and put a bubble on one of the rocks, and then the hunter could then hide inside that bubble and stay alive, but also get the weapons of light buff. So you would actually do more damage and could cycle him faster. So
that's interesting.
But yeah, so for that, like Matt was saying, if you were sword bearer, you definitely had to be very cognizant of what was going on, and the idea was. What if you killed the boomers? It would cause more of them to spawn. So you'd want to kill one, but you wouldn't want to kill the other. So and you would kind of maybe like plink them down a little bit because that would keep attention on the team that was doing rockets instead of like the sword bearer, because the sword bearer had to stay alive. That was kind of the only.
Because they'd have the chalice.
Right.
Well.
Exactly. Yeah. The sword bearer usually had the chalice, so they could heal. But then on hard mode, you didn't have the chalice, so it didn't matter. Yeah. These were very like the things, the shady shit that we used to have to do to try to get through a raid make me laugh now, because it was like crazy things where you we would use the exploit of you'd use No Land Beyond to dump all of your ammo and then put on Icebreaker, and then it would cause everything to drop a ton of heavy ammo because there'd be a cooldown of when you could use your heavy ammo synth, and most of the time you'd wipe and it wouldn't be time to use another heavy ammo synth, or people would be cheapskates and not buy heavy ammo synth. So we'd wipe, and then everyone would have to dump all of their stuff and then put on Icebreaker, because then it would induce the no ammo glitch, and then it would cause a bunch of heavy bricks to fall, and then you'd change it. And then also when you started the encounter, you would stand on the crystals to get the whole thing to inform, and then you would jump. There's a bunch of doorways with like ledges. Everyone would jump on those doorways and ledges, because otherwise the acolytes would like fry you as soon as the side doors opened up. So there's all these like little goofy things that we all did to kind of cobble and manage to survive. And like, I will say I have more nostalgia for this raid than I do Vault of Glass, because the number of sleepless nights that I spent trying to do LFG teams, because I wasn't in a clan at the time, number of times that I would try to get 3 hard mode raids in just to get a Word of Crota or to get Fang of Ur-Ute, was like, I don't want to share, because you could only get the weapon, you could only get the primaries from the hard mode version of the raid. That's the only place that they dropped. And at the time, those were elemental primaries, which were super, super important for the original D1, because that's when like Arc Burn and Solar Burn did like 3 times damage like than a normal primary. So like Fatebringer and Vision of Confluence and Fang of Ur-Ute and all of those were so important because they were elemental primaries. And so you had to get them, and the only way you could get them was from hard mode versions of the raid. So
that's cool.
I'm not proud of the time that I've spent, but I will say I still have my year 1 Fatebringer and Vision of Confluence on my D1 account, because I am proud of how much time I've wasted in those raids.
That's awesome. But yeah, that's so janky. I love it.
Oh yeah,
all the
no, it was
weird stuff.
Yeah. And you didn't have to do that kind of stuff in Vault of Glass. Vault of Glass hard mode just required like a solid team of like competency, and people had to go in and like kill the oracles, and you couldn't really cheese it in the same way. Like ultimately, like when the raid first came out, people could use like vortex nades to get them to fall off the side. But like if you were trying to do hard mode Atheon because you wanted Vex Mythic class, like it was just more of a challenge of skill than this like shady, like what's the one helmet that gives you health pickups on orbs, and like, yeah.
So that's about all we have to talk about as far as Crota's End goes. We also talked about the crafting situation, the DDoS situation. So if you guys had or would like to further the discussion at all, please follow us on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it at this point. Send us a message, send us an email, whatever. Always looking to hear from you guys. Follow our Twitch. And without further ado, we'll see you next time.